Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for another episode in our series for founders here at Raise Papers. Today, I'm joined by Kevin Morris, who is a very seasoned individual in the community fundraising space. He's been in the space for many, many years. He and I have known each other for a very long time. He's worked on some of the largest crowdfunding rounds that I think we've ever seen before, and has a really interesting agency that we'll dive into. And the goal of this episode is really to kind of help you, the founder, understand better what it takes to run a successful campaign and a successful fundraise when doing a community round. So with that, I'm going to hop on over here. Kevin, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Chris, for having me today. Yeah, it's funny. We've known each other for a few years. We only met in person for the first time a few months ago. It was a pleasure to finally do that. But yeah, no, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. So would love for those who don't know you, give a little bit of background on yourself and what you do at Atlas Road now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the equity crowdfunding space probably as long as you have, and probably as long as most folks out there. I actually started exploring the equity crowdfunding space 2 careers ago when I was co-founder of an online apparel business called Distilled, DSTLD. We were one of the first companies to raise money through Reg A plus, raised about $9 million. I then shifted and ended up working for one of our lead investors, Wavemaker Partners, and I ran our venture studio where we incubated a lot of robotics businesses, companies like Miso Robotics and Graze, which I think a lot of people on the who will be listening have heard of. And we raised a lot of capital through equity crowdfunding that way. So over about 8 years of my career, I got into Reg CF and Reg A plus, and about 2 years ago in 2022, decided to start my own firm, Atlas Road, where I use the skill set that I learned raising money for myself through equity crowdfunding to help others. You know, it takes a village, as I like to say, to run a successful equity crowdfunding campaign. It's like a more complicated e-commerce
Hmm.
business, or setting up your own e-commerce raise, but you're also layering on regulatory compliance audit. And there's a lot of successes and wins in my days. Had a couple failures as well, but you learn from those. And so one of the reasons I wanted to start the company Atlas Road was to help other founders, help them navigate the process. I've been in their shoes before, and it's been exciting. I mean, I've been lucky to have a slew of different clients, many of which you know, and help them raise lots of money over the last 2 years. And I see the space growing even more, and I think it's going to only get bigger over the coming months and years.
So when you think about kind of a fundraise in totality, I don't know, can you speak to some of the kind of key buckets and things you need to be thinking about as a founder? Is there kind of like a roadmap of items that you're like, these are all of the components you need to be thinking about if you want to think about a successful raise?
Yeah, I think the two biggest things are in this space, you have to pay to raise. I think a lot of people don't always appreciate that. There's some capital up front that you need to set aside to get your raise going. And that's a varying amount based on the size of your raise, based on where you're at as a company. But some of the things like an audit or a financial review are obviously important. There's often legal costs, regulatory costs, things like that. Marketing costs are a big one. So I think the first thing is, you're going to need to have a chunk of cash in your account or access to cash to get the raise going. Um, Part of that is the marketing side. So you need to jumpstart your raise somehow. You cannot have the best business in the world and launch on, let's say, a funding portal or a white label solution and expect the money to come in. You need to have something to kickstart it. And that's either your community. A lot of companies have a large community to pull on, whether they're customers or people in the founders network, or ad spend. You need to get that flywheel going. And once you get things moving, then I think you can have a very successful raise. But the other point, so obviously the first point I mentioned was cash in the bank, some amount of cash to get things going. The second point is you need to have the right assets and storytelling assets for your company. Because when you're raising money privately for your company, you're talking to individuals, one on one conversations, coffee, beer, whatever, back and forth, webinars, all those sorts of things. With equity crowdfunding, you don't have the luxury of pitching 100,000 or a million investors. And that's what you're doing, right? You have this funnel of people, and you may put your investment idea in front of a million people. They click on the Facebook ad or the post, and then they sort of start the process. You don't have the ability to talk to all those like you would privately. And so the company needs to have the best visual assets and content available to tell their story properly to the crowd. And you could have the best business ever, but it doesn't mean it's going to translate well to equity crowdfunding. And I've seen plenty of deals fail, not because they were a bad idea, but because they didn't approach the equity crowdfunding process more like a marketer, and more like, hey, I need to, I need to get people's interest. I need to, because I only have 20, 30 seconds to pitch them. And if they don't like what they see or they don't understand what they see, they're going to go somewhere else.
When you think about kind of advertising campaign without obviously giving away the store, what are some of the key methods you have seen really work for Founder? Is it truly just Facebook ads? Is it a mix of doing, sponsored content and working with certain newsletters? Like, what does that look like?
It's Facebook and Google and TikTok will always be a part of if you're advertising your raise, will always be a part of it. Now, what the mix is, it depends on your type of business. I have plenty of consumer facing clients who the Facebook does quite well for them, because I think the Facebook Google audience resonates with that. Plus, when you're serving content that way, it's, again, that person is scrolling on their app. And if they have 10 seconds, and if they understand it, they'll go somewhere else, right? Versus like a newsletter. So let's say I'm spending on a Morning Brew or spending on a Robinhood. That may be the same audience, but that audience is used to taking more time to consume the content, right? And so oftentimes there's sponsored articles, or there's just more text, and it's down on the newsletter. And so oftentimes I find that the more complicated businesses, I have some clients that are very AI focused, and their deal opportunity resonates better for the newsletter crowd, because I think the newsletter crowd is used to taking more time to consume the content, whether it's sponsored or not sponsored. The other big thing is, I've seen this so many times, especially on the funding portals, is you have these issuers that are doing a spray and pray on the ad spend, but they're not actually really analyzing the results afterwards, right? And you have even basic tools like Google Analytics. I mean, it's such an analytical game, equity crowdfunding. You get instant response, instant results. Versus like Chris, when you've raised money privately for your companies, you may pitch somebody and not hear anything for weeks. And it may be because they don't like you, maybe because they're busy, maybe because their kid was sick or they had COVID, whatever. With equity crowdfunding, I serve an ad today, I get results today. And I think a lot of founders will source all these great opportunities, paid or unpaid, and not actually stop to look back at the data and help inform their new decisions.
When you think about budgeting, you said you do need to have some money coming into this thing if you really want to do it well. Do you have kind of hey, if you're trying to raise X million dollars, here's the percent you need to set aside for success? Do you kind of have what that looks like, or is it pretty varied?
From an ad spend perspective, I tend to tell people it's anywhere from, if it's definitely in the double digits, I think it's anywhere from 10 to 25 or 30%. It can be certainly better. It can be worse. I think if you're a consumer facing business, and I think Chris and you and I have talked about this, is in general, consumer facing sort of CPG brands or anything, they should tend to expect a higher return on ad spend than, let's say, a SaaS AI company or a robotics company or something. I think part of that is just the investment opportunity. Selling a physical good, even if it's some sort of techie good, doesn't have the as attractive of a potential return on investment as, say, some deep tech robotics business or some med tech or something like that. But that's okay, because when you are equity crowdfunding for a consumer facing business, you're also acquiring customers. So I think it sort of balances out. But yeah, I mean, it's double digit cost of capital just on your ad spend at the end of the day. And that is a tough pill to swallow for a lot of founders. But I mean, you and I live in the space. This is what we do for a living. I say my third child is equity crowdfunding. I think there's a lot of pros pros to it as well. There's a high cost of capital, but equity crowdfunding puts the founder in the driver's seat for the fundraising process. And that's not the case when you raise traditionally.
Now, one of the other components is, hey, all right, you've driven them to the offering page, right? Now people want to interact with you, and they're going to ask questions, especially on the Q&A section. I know things can get fairly heated on those Q&A sections at time. When you think about best practices about communicating with investors on those Q&A sections, what are some of the things that you think about and you encourage your founders to do in those Q&A sections?
Well, certainly be extremely proactive in them and making sure you're responding sort of within a few business days. That's for sure. Most of my clients, we really recommend for all the responses to be in the CEO's voice and the CEO to be responding. We'll obviously sometimes help them, like someone will ask a question about something, and we'll say, well, you should phrase it this way. Things can get heated. I've certainly been a part of those before, and it's you never want to get into a scenario where there's like a back and forth conversation where there's like 10 different threads. So you want to be concise. You want to be you sort of don't necessarily, especially if it's a heated question, you don't want to sort of you want to tie a bow on it, and so there's no reason to there's nothing to respond to. The other thing is certain things, like there's so many times people are asking about projections. Mm-hmm. What's your cash burn look like? What's your revenue going to be like next year? When are you going to be profitable? All those things. Listen, I tell every founder, every CEO, and I live this too. Like, your forecast is never correct. Any forecast you build is never going to be correct. Hopefully, it's always correct for it's incorrect for the better, not for the worse. And so but it's tough. And so generally, I like to be a little more high level when we're responding to something like that. Like, we expect growth over the next few years, and our goal is some sort of potential liquidity event, whether that's an acquisition or an IPO, but we don't have any specific plans right now. But yeah, it's difficult because founders need to remember, anything that you put out on your crowdfund campaign, especially in the discussion board, is out there forever and it will never go away.
Now, one of the other things that I like for founders to better understand when they're getting into this process, we tell them, hey, it takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get up and running in terms of doing your legal documentation, your financials, getting your offering page onboarded as well. But when you're thinking about, again, kind of the holistic nature of a raise from end to end, hey, I want to do a raise to I've closed on X dollars that I was expecting to or got in the range of what I wanted to raise. What does kind of the full timeline look like?
Yeah, well, I'd say 4 to 6 weeks is tight, especially given the audit or the review timeline. But yeah, it's at a minimum a month, but probably closer to 2 months to get live. You can expect a nice pop at the beginning of your round if you structure it properly, but you really need to plan that most of the meaningful net cash in the business in the round comes at the end. You're going to bring cash in the middle. In theory, it should cover your cost to service the round, the ad spend, all those things, but it's really at the end of the round that you're going to see the pop. And that's important because with Reg CF, now that you can raise $5 million, a company who can do that, who's done their audit and say, I can raise $5 million, I almost often recommend don't raise all 5 at once. You're better off splitting that up into smaller rounds, get that sweep of cash at the end, which will help your business. Because if you set your goal too high, especially on your freshman raise, you'll find that you'll be in this sort of no man's land. You'll never actually get there. You'll feel like you're never going to get there because you have so far to go. And the crowd really works. That sort of sense of urgency messaging really resonates well with the crowd. And so I think in answer to your question, it's probably 2 months or so to get live. And I would recommend your first round should be shorter. Make it 90 days. Make it 75 days. Get a lot more information. Hopefully oversubscribe and be able to point back to that. And then you can go out and raise again. And that's the nice thing about Reg CF is you can sort of start and stop it much more frequently than, let's say, a Reg A plus.
Well, actually, that's a good segue into discussing Reg A plus. I see founders that come along and they say, okay, I've done a CF, we raised $500,000, but we want to raise way more than that. So we're going to do Reg A plus. You go, well, that might be a bit misguided. Talk about some of the challenges with Reg A Plus and when it makes sense to take that step up.
Yeah, I mean, the Reg A Plus process, if you feel like you want to or need to raise more than, I'd almost say 7 or 8 million a year, you should explore the Reg A Plus. The cap on the Reg CF is 5, but you can always raise money from accredited investors. But you want to start the process early, I would say, because oftentimes you require a different level of audit. You don't know, there's an extra layer of due diligence, and you don't know how long the SEC is going to take to review your offering. So if you have gotten your feet wet on a Reg CF and it's going well and you're maybe 2 or 3 million in, or something like that, then that's the point of time that you really want to start getting serious about playing a Reg A Plus. You can file your docs with the SEC concurrently. You can do it confidentially, even if you want to. But it's good to sort of dual track that purpose, because you don't want to wait till your Reg CF's over and then realize, crap, I have to do a new audit and I need to hire outside counsel to help me prepare the 1A and all those things. So yeah, I'd say it's sort of midway through the midway through raising a few $1 million on Reg CF, you should start to get serious about the Reg A.
I know you work with clients across both, platforms with built-in audiences like Start Engine and WeFunder, and then you also work with groups like Dalmore, Issuance, Dealmaker. What are your perspectives on when it makes sense to work with, kind of the built-in audience group versus more of your broker-dealer where it's going to be about you bringing the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure, any first-time issuer, not for sure, but in most cases, any first-time issuer should look to raise on a funding portal first. I think, especially if you're not sure you really want to, like, how serious you are about equity crowdfunding, they provide low to minimal upfront costs. They provide an audience. They sort of hold your hand in many areas. And so I think they make it sort of easy to get up and running. I do think that when you're looking at a self-hosted raise, one of the pros right now, and again, these funding portals are changing, but one of the pros right now to a self-hosted raise is you basically own all of the data in your funnel. So if somebody starts the investment process but doesn't finish, you typically get access to their email and or their phone number with a self-hosted solution. You don't always get that with a funding portal. Now, again, some of the funding portals are shifting their strategy there. The thing about a self-hosted solution is there's also a lot of upfront and fixed costs to service the fundraise there, and there's a lot more moving pieces. And I found plenty of founders who just got overwhelmed with the self-hosted solution because there's just a lot more decisions to make. So I do think that in a lot of cases, a funding portal is a great first effort for your crowdfund. Now, again, there's exceptions to the rule, and then I think you do see a lot of people shift over to self-hosted afterwards because perhaps they've built up more infrastructure in-house to be able to service the full-fledged self-hosted solution.
How much value do you find, you have a new buyer, right, who's coming in for the first time and investing in your company, and then you have kind of the repeat investor. As you work with repeat issuers, do you see that there's quite a bit of adoption of repeat investors coming in and maybe doubling or tripling down? And how valuable is it to kind of nurture your audience once you begin to build it in your first crowdfund?
Oh, I mean, absolutely, Chris. If you use the numbers I talked about in the beginning, if you pitch 1 million people through Facebook ads and partnerships, and then you get, let's say, 100,000 of them to come to the deal page, and then you get 10,000 of them to give your information to, they give you the information, and you get 1,000 people to invest. Again, these are rough numbers. Of that 1 million, 100,000 or 10,000, those larger sets, they're still following your deal. You can retarget them in some way, whether it's through email or through retargeting ads or anything. As you keep making progress in the business and you keep opening subsequent rounds, you will find that there's a lot of dry powder in there because not everybody has invested. So that's one thing. Each subsequent round, I think, in my experience, you see a much larger, you see a lot of people that you've basically already paid for to participate again. The repeat investors as well. I mean, I've seen sometimes rounds 10, 20, 30% have been from existing investors in the company who might have invested in the last round and are investing in this round. And there's perks you can do. You can give certain perks, like if you invest again, we'll give you bonus shares. If you invest again, we'll give you X free swag or whatever it is. And that's a real asset for your business, because if you launch that second or third round and you structure the deal and the marketing properly, you could see a huge pop in the beginning, most of which you've paid for, but you haven't paid for in this round. It's sort of a sunk cost, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. What are some of the biggest pitfalls you see founders make that lead to them either failing or stumbling in their round?
I think plenty of people, again, launch their round and don't have a plan. Like, hey, I'm going to launch my round and I need to raise X and I need to raise it in 3 months. And they don't build and they don't execute against that plan. And so, I mentioned the marketing assets and all that earlier in our discussion, but they sort of launch and just assume everything's going to go well, and hopefully it does. But oftentimes you need to really hit the ground hard, really execute against. I'm going to post on social here. I'm going to email here. I'm going to spend ads here. You can't just, it's not like if you build it, they will come. It's you have to build it, and then you have to nurture it, and you have to execute against it. And a lot of founders don't think about that, and they launch and they're like, wait, I only raised 50K. Why? And I'm like, well, do you have a plan in place? And they never do.
That makes a lot of sense. When should a founder think about engaging a firm like yours that could really support them through their entire fundraise?
Most of my clients are looking to raise and sort of going in looking to raise at least $5 million through equity crowdfunding. Now they may do it in a few different rounds. It doesn't, there's plenty of founders who are super hands-on and don't need the services from someone like us, because it's expensive to crowdfund, and we're obviously an additional cost. So, I do think it's founders who either know what they don't know or are so busy running the business and recognize, hey, I need somebody else to help me run the round because I need to focus on growing the business. And so that tends to be our sweet spot in terms of when people are interested in engaging us.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, my thing would be, I kind of live and breathe this stuff. I do it all day, every day. It's our business, right, is to cover this space. So I'm very knowledgeable on it. And even for me, I find it challenging, especially when it's above and beyond your day-to-day work, having to actually go into your fundraise. It's a lot. So founders who really want to get out there, be successful, do it the right way, finding and working with a firm like Kevin's, I really do think is very, very important. And we're going to see more successes in the industry when people decide to really take this, full-blown approach and go and work with the right partners that can help you be successful. So, Kevin, thank you so much for your time, your insights, and for helping to grow this industry. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chris, for having me. I really appreciate it.
And last thing, Kevin, if people want to get in touch with you and potentially work with you, where should they go? What should they do?
They can visit us at www.atlas-rd.com, or they can email us at info at atlas-rd.com.
Awesome. Kevin, thank you so much as always for your time, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks for listening.